Well, thank you so much for being with us at House Church tonight. And man, it's been so good to be a part of different house churches and to really just hear all the stories about everything that God's been doing and just being able to build community and dive deeper into God's word. Man, it's so good. It's so edifying. And today we're going to be looking at the book of Titus. It's not a very big book. Now, you probably haven't heard a lot of messages come out of the book of Titus, but really what's taking place is Paul is writing a letter to Titus to encourage him, but also he's writing this letter with a sense of urgency. It has a unique tone to it. And you know, in conversations, tone makes all the difference in the world, like the tone of the conversation. And just to kind of help you see what I'm talking about is all the men. Let's just say that your wife calls you and you answer the phone and she says, "Hey, just wanted to check and see where you're at. I got dinner for you." I mean, that would be amazing, right? It'd be a good tone. But the same conversation could go like this, like, "Hey, where you at? I got dinner. Just need, like, when you gonna be here?" And see, tone conveys a whole lot. And the tone that Paul is using to Titus is just a sense of urgency, to live with urgency. And so we're gonna pick up today. We're just gonna read one verse in chapter 1, verse 5. And it says this: "The reason I left you in Crete," and so Paul and Titus went to Crete together, and then Paul left Titus there. And he said, "The reason I left you in Crete was that you might put in order what was left unfinished." Like there was still some unfinished work to do, and which was to appoint elders, AKA to develop house church, to develop pastors, and to appoint elders in every town as I directed you. So essentially to develop house church pastors and launch house churches. And so the big question that we're wrestling with today is this, is how to live with urgency in a world of complacency. And so I think we can agree that in 2020, in regards to faith, the world that we live in is complacent. And so how do we live with urgency? How do we live with intentionality in this complacent type world? Well, the first way is we have to see that there's still a task that's been left unfinished. There's still a task that we have to be a part of. And another way that we can do that is through launching an urgency to launch house churches and to invest in house churches, which honestly is exactly what you're doing. And so if you would right now at House Church, man, could you just celebrate your house church pastor and your host? Come on, at all of our house churches, let's celebrate them and thank them for all that's happening. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because guess what? You are invested in a house church and so you're already doing those two things. But another thing that Paul talks about in chapter 2 is this urgency to equip the next generation. And you can read, through a couple of verses in chapter 2, and you can see that, like Paul's urging Titus to just hurry up and don't forget about the next generation, to invest in them and to equip them. And so I just want to kind of make us aware of a couple of things is, a lot of the experts, if you would, that study these type things, you know what they say? They say that 4% of Gen Z, this upcoming generation, only 4% of them are going to have a biblical worldview, meaning that they're going to be like what we would call like an evangelical Christian, only 4%. And they also say that there's double the amount of Gen Z that are claiming to be atheist than that of millennials. And so I want us to feel the weight of this. Like, this is a big deal. This is significant. This is our responsibility to lean into this and to be a part of this. And this is exactly what Paul is saying to Titus, is that we have to live with urgency to be able to equip this next generation. And all the experts are out there saying, if we're not careful, we're on the verge of losing an entire generation. And man, this cannot happen on our clock. Like, it just can't happen. And so we have to be a part of investing in them. And so the best place for them to be is a part of house churches and part of the student ministry and part of KXP. But it also happens in the homes and those type things. And so one thing I would love for house churches to talk through tonight, and really just something to wrestle with, is what's the difference between living with urgency and living in a hurry? Are you tracking with me? Like, what's the difference between living with urgency and just living in a hurry? And a couple of thoughts just to kind of get you going that direction is, when we live with urgency, we have a bigger picture. Like, we have a kingdom mindset. So urgency is tapping into something bigger. Living with urgency might mean just extreme intentionality in conversations and in your marriage and all these different things. And so I would love for y'all to hash that out, especially knowing that one way to live with urgency in a world of complacency is to be a part of house churches and to raise up this next generation. And just to kind of close all this out, I want to kind of put all this into perspective. And let's just say that your favorite football team is playing football, okay? And it's the fourth quarter, and they're down by 3, and there's 1 minute left on the clock. So you got 1 minute on the clock, and you got 80 yards to go. What type of plays would you call? I mean, would you want to run the ball? Typically not. And typically when the coach calls a running play at that point, that's when you start yelling at the TV. That's exactly what happens. So typically you're probably not going to want to run the ball. You're going to want to throw the ball. And here's why. Because the time on the clock is going to determine the play that you call. Are you tracking? The time on the clock will determine the play that you call. And we have to wake up and see, man, that the clock is ticking. And so we have to live with urgency to be about raising up this next generation, to investing our life in house churches and to be pastored and to be shepherded and to be a part of a bigger story, which is God's story and God's mission. And just to really let this kind of hit home is for all of those that are parents. So let's think about it this way. When your little boy or precious little girl was born into this world, man, what a gift, what a miracle that God has blessed you with, right? And so they were born into this world. You know what started happening in that moment? The clock started ticking. Because before you know it, they're going to be 18 and you're going to be launching them out into this world. Sure, you can be around and help and guide, but you're kind of launching them out. And so you got about 18 years, and that's roughly 216 months. But if your little boy or little girl is now in 6th grade, that's only 84 months left. You see the clock's ticking. And if they made it to 9th grade now, then guess what? That's about 48 months. And for all of our college students, once you made it to college, man, you only have about 48 months if you're a freshman. 48 months to really be a part of what God is doing on your campus and to invest in community. You see, the time on the clock, it determines the play that we call. And in a world that's just kind of crazy, if we can be honest, a world that's completely complacent in regards to faith, it's time for you and I, as the church, as the people of God, to start living with urgency, to start living with intentionality, to start believing that there is an unfinished task, which is to make disciples of all nations. And if we can start to lean into that, man, it could change a lot. And so I can't wait to hear about all the conversations. And once again, man, thank y'all so much for being at House Church. And your House Church pastor is going to take over from here.